I grew up hearing stories about Boston Mills. Everyone in town called it Helltown, but it felt like just another legend. You know the kind. People loved to talk. My parents, my neighbors, they all had something to say about the place. Some said it was cursed. Others blamed the government, saying they evacuated the town in the 70s to cover up dangerous experiments. Me? I wasn't sure what to believe. But that church, the one with the upside-down cross windows, that always stuck with me. It was the only thing that caught my attention. It wasn't just a creepy building. It felt like it was waiting for something, or someone. When I was a teenager, my friends and I thought it would be fun to see what all the fuss was about. You know how it is when you're young. You're invincible, or at least you think you are. We'd heard stories from older kids about late-night trips to Helltown, and none of them sounded too bad. Mostly pranks or exaggerated tales of shadows in the trees. So we packed into my friend Jake's car one Friday night and decided to make our own memories. Looking back, I wish we hadn't. The drive was uneventful at first. We joked, we laughed, we had the radio playing some old rock station to cut the tension. But as we got closer to the town, the road seemed different. The trees were taller than I remembered, the branches twisting in ways that didn't feel natural. I remember looking at Jake, but he was focused on the road. Nobody said anything, but the energy in the car shifted. We weren't laughing anymore. When we pulled up to the church, I felt something I hadn't expected. Curiosity, sure, but also hesitation. The church looked abandoned, but not in the usual way. It wasn't just run down or covered in graffiti. It looked untouched, like it had been waiting for us. And that door, the door that everyone said was always locked, was open. Wide open. I swear, no one said a word. We just stared at it, like we were waiting for something to come out. It was Jake who broke the silence. "You guys want to go in or what?" His voice cracked just a little. I could tell he was trying to sound tough, but none of us moved. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was more like a quiet understanding. Something wasn't right here. But like idiots, we went in anyway. Inside, it was dark, not pitch black, but just enough light from the moon to make out shapes. The pews were still there, covered in dust, untouched for years. And the altar. God, the altar. That's where we saw it. A figure dressed in black, standing perfectly still. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching us. My heart was racing, but no one else seemed to notice at first. I nudged Jake, pointed at the altar, but before I could say anything, the figure disappeared. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. "Did you guys see that?" I whispered, but no one answered. They were all staring at the door. It had slammed shut. There was no wind, no reason for it to close, but there we were, trapped. That's when the panic set in. We bolted for the door, throwing ourselves against it until it finally gave way. We ran like our lives depended on it, and maybe they did. I don't remember how we got back to the car, just that we drove out of there as fast as we could. But that night, that was just the beginning. The car was dead silent. No one wanted to talk about what had just happened at the church. We drove for miles, not saying a word, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure again, standing in the middle of the road, watching us. But the road stayed empty. Still, something felt off. The further we got from Helltown, the more I convinced myself that we hadn't imagined it. That door slamming, that figure disappearing, it was all real. Too real. That night, when I finally got home, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see the church. I'd see that figure. There was something about the way it stood there, so still, like it was waiting for us to do something, waiting for me to do something. I tried shaking it off, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. There was more to it. Something had followed me home. I didn't hear footsteps, but there was a presence. You know when you know you're not alone? That's how it felt. A few days later, weird things started happening. Nothing big at first, just small stuff. My bedroom door would creak open at night, even though I always shut it tight. Lights flickered when I walked into a room. I heard faint noises in the hallway when I was supposed to be the only one home. At first, I told myself it was just the house settling, normal stuff. But the noises, they weren't random. It was like someone was walking around the house, circling me, watching. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? Hey guys, I think something from Helltown followed me home. That's not exactly something you bring up in casual conversation. But Jake, he started acting weird too. He wouldn't answer my calls, and when I finally saw him again, he looked different, like he hadn't slept in days. I tried to talk to him about it, but he just shook his head, said he didn't want to wake it up. Those were his exact words. Wake what up? He wouldn't explain. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. I sat up in bed, heart racing, straining to hear more. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing back and forth. Then they stopped, right outside my door. I waited, barely breathing, hoping it was just my imagination. But the door handle turned. Slowly. I froze. I didn't move, didn't even blink. The handle jiggled, but the door stayed closed. And just like that, the footsteps started again, moving away, down the hall. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning, I called Jake again. No answer. I drove to his house, pounded on the door until his mom finally answered. She said he wasn't home. He'd gone out the night before and hadn't come back. My stomach sank. I knew where he'd gone. Without saying a word, I got back in my car and headed straight for Helltown. I didn't even think twice. I just knew. When I got there, everything looked the same. Quiet, empty, like nothing had ever happened. The church stood in the distance, and I swear it looked exactly like it did that night. Untouched. The door was closed now, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. As I stepped closer, I felt that same presence, that same weight in the air. It wasn't in my head. It was real. I stood there, staring at the church, waiting for the door to open again. Then, just like before, it creaked open. No wind, no sound, just that slow, deliberate movement. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know why I went in. Maybe I thought I'd find Jake. Maybe I thought I could stop whatever had followed us. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, I knew I'd made a mistake. The figure was there, standing in the exact same spot. This time, it wasn't watching me. It was waiting for me to make the next move. And I knew, without a doubt, that whatever had started that night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stood stopped at the church's doorway, staring at the figure. It had not moved an inch. But I felt as if it was drawing me in, as if an invisible force had grabbed hold of me. Every instinct in my body screamed me to turn around and get out of there, but my legs wouldn't budge. My gaze kept returning to the figure, despite my instincts to look away. Something about it felt strange. Not just the silence, but like it didn't belong here. I stepped forward. I'm not sure why. I approached, perhaps out of curiosity or dread. My heart was pounding in my ears, and every step felt heavier than the last. As I approached the altar, I saw that the air around the image appeared to ripple, much to heat waves coming off concrete in the summer. But it was not hot. If anything, the temperature dropped as I got closer. My breath hung in the air, misting in front of me, and I couldn't stop. I was drawn to it, as if I needed to comprehend. Then I heard it, barely a whisper, but it was there. You shouldn't have come back. The voice wasn't loud, but it echoed in my head, almost like a thought more than a sound. I looked around, expecting to see someone else, but we were alone, just me and whatever that thing was. I wanted to ask who or what it was, but the words wouldn't come out. My throat felt tight, like someone had wrapped their hands around it. A sharp noise broke the tension. Wood creaking. I whipped around and saw the pews shifting, like something was crawling underneath them. The sound was faint at first, like nails scratching across the floor, but it got louder, more frantic. My pulse spiked, and I finally managed to take a step back. The figure hadn't moved, but I could feel it watching me, even though I couldn't see its face. I wanted to run, but part of me knew I wouldn't get far. The noise stopped. Dead silence. I turned back to the figure, but it was gone. Just gone. The altar stood empty, like it had never been there in the first place. I stood there, blinking, trying to make sense of it, but there was nothing. No sign of movement. Nothing crawling under the pews. Just stillness. But that didn't make me feel any safer. In fact, the air felt even heavier now, like the entire building was holding its breath. That's when I saw it. The door was closing. Slowly. I hadn't noticed it moving before, but now it was halfway shut, inching closer to sealing me in. My heart hammered in my chest, and I finally snapped out of my daze. I ran. I didn't think, I didn't look back. I just sprinted for the door. My feet slipped on the dusty floor, but I caught myself just in time to shove the door open and burst into the night. Outside, everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The trees, the road, even the sky felt off, like I wasn't seeing the real world anymore. I leaned against the car, trying to catch my breath, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I couldn't get that voice out of my head. You shouldn't have come back. I wasn't sure if it was a warning or a threat, but either way, I knew it wasn't over. I drove home in a daze. My mind was spinning with everything I'd just seen, everything I'd just heard. But more than that, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake. Where was he? Had he heard the same voice? Had he seen the same figure? The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Jake must have come back, just like me. Maybe he'd gotten closer, learned more. But where was he now? I parked outside my house, but I didn't get out of the car. Something was keeping me inside, like stepping out meant accepting what had happened. I stared at my front door, trying to decide if I was ready to walk back into my life after what I'd seen. Because deep down, I knew the moment I opened that door, nothing would ever be the same. I sat there in the car, staring at my front door, but I couldn't bring myself to go in. The house didn't feel like home anymore. Nothing felt right. That church, the figure, Jake missing, it was all tangled in my head. I didn't know where one thought ended and the next began. And that voice, you shouldn't have come back. I heard it over and over, like it was stuck in a loop. I knew I couldn't just ignore it, but I also had no idea what to do next. Eventually, I got out and made my way to the front door. My hand hovered over the doorknob for a second, as if opening it meant stepping into something I couldn't control. But I did it. Inside, the house was quiet, exactly the way I'd left it. Nothing out of place. But it felt different, like I wasn't alone. I walked through the hallway, flicking on lights as I went, though I wasn't sure why. The light didn't make me feel any safer. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I'd see the figure, standing at the altar, watching, waiting. I tossed and turned for hours, drifting in and out of restless sleep. At some point, I gave up, sat up in bed and stared at the wall. Something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had followed us from Helltown wasn't done yet, like it was still out there, waiting for me to do something. Or maybe it was already here. Around 3 a.m, I heard a noise downstairs. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, just one of those random sounds your brain makes up when you're half asleep. But then I heard it again. A low thump, like something heavy had been dropped. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, but I stayed completely still, listening. Another thump, then a creak, like footsteps moving through the house. I got out of bed as quietly as I could, my hands shaking. I didn't have anything to defend myself with, but I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a lamp, and made my way to the door. The hallway was dark, except for the faint glow from the streetlight outside. I could feel my pulse in my throat, every beat louder than the last. Slowly, I stepped toward the stairs, straining to hear any more movement. There it was again, a soft creak, like someone shifting their weight. My mind raced. Was it Jake? Had he come back? Or was it something else? I took a deep breath and made my way downstairs, one step at a time, gripping the lamp like my life depended on it. When I reached the bottom, I paused. The living room was empty, but the air felt thick. I couldn't explain it. Something had been here. I scanned the room, every shadow looking like it could hide something. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the front door. It was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it. I always locked it. My chest tightened. I stood there, staring at the door, trying to make sense of it. Did I forget? Or did someone unlock it from the inside? My head was spinning, and I couldn't think straight. I suddenly felt it. The same presence from the church. It was here, in my home. I couldn't see it, but I was certain it was there. My skin prickled, and every nerve was on high alert. I cautiously backed up, inching toward the kitchen, not daring to look away from the front door. But the moment I turned my head, I heard it again. A voice, just as before. You shouldn't have come back. I dropped the lamp. The crash echoed through the house, shattering the tranquility. My hands were shaking. I recognized that voice. It wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't even coming from our house. It was inside my head, as clear as my own thoughts. You shouldn't have come back. I took a step back, but my feet felt heavy, as if I were stuck in place again. My body wasn't responding to me. Every instinct told me to run, to get out, but I couldn't move. I forced myself to look around. Nothing had changed. The living room was just as it had been. The door was still unlocked, but now it felt like a trap. I was staring at it, wondering what would happen if I opened it. Would it be Jake standing there? Or something else? My mind raced. There had to be a reason for all this, but I didn't have time to figure it out. That voice, it wasn't done with me. The air felt thick again, pressing down on my chest. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps, and every sound in the house felt amplified, like I was in some kind of tunnel. My own heartbeat was deafening. Then the lights flickered, not once, but twice, and on the second flicker, I saw it. For just a split second, standing in the corner of the room, the figure, the same one from the church, still, unmoving, but watching, always watching. I blinked, and it was gone. My head spun. I felt dizzy, like I was caught in a loop, reliving the same nightmare over and over again. But this wasn't a dream, it was happening. I couldn't deny it anymore. This thing had followed me from Helltown, and it wasn't leaving. Not until it got what it wanted. And I had no idea what that was. I backed away slowly, my legs finally responding, but I didn't know where I was going. Every corner of the house felt like it could hold something worse than what I'd already seen. I needed to get out. I reached for the door, but as my hand touched the knob, I froze. There was something wrong. The voice came again, louder this time. It's too late. I jerked my hand away like I'd been burned. My mind raced back to that moment at the church, the figure disappearing, the door closing on its own. It had let me leave. It had wanted me to leave. I wasn't meant to escape that place. I was meant to bring it with me. I wasn't running away from it. I was bringing it closer, into my home, my life. My breath caught in my throat. I realized then it was using me. I was the key. Suddenly, I heard something from upstairs. A soft creak, followed by another. Footsteps. My blood turned cold. I wasn't alone in the house. I hadn't been for a while. Whatever I'd unleashed was here, moving through my home like it belonged, like it was always supposed to. My heart raced as I took a step toward the stairs, knowing I had no choice but to follow the sound. I climbed the stairs, each step slower than the last. The hallway stretched out in front of me, longer than it should have been. My bedroom door was open, just a crack, but I could see the shadows inside shifting. I reached out, my hand shaking, and pushed the door open. Inside, the room looked normal at first, but then I saw the mirror. There, in the reflection, was the figure, standing in the exact same spot as before, watching me through the glass. I spun around, but the room was empty, just me. But when I looked back at the mirror, it was still there, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. I could not breathe. The realization struck me hard. The figure didn't haunt my residence. It haunted me. It'd always been me. It was never about Jake, the church, or Helltown. It was about what I'd brought back, the piece of that place I'd taken with me. I was the connector. I am the reason this stuff exists outside of that church. And now, I didn't know how to stop it. I grew up in Franklin, Kentucky, and everyone knew about Crybaby Bridge. It was one of those stories that seemed to stick, passed down from elder to younger generations, each adding a little more to the legend. They say a mother, driven insane by who knows what, threw her kid into the river below, and on certain nights, you might hear the wailing of that lost child. I'd heard it perhaps a dozen times, but I never took it seriously, just a frightening tale to keep the kids in line. That was until one autumn night when my buddies challenged me to go out alone. It was meant as a joke. We'd all been gathered around a bonfire, telling stories, when someone mentioned the bridge. The assignment was simple: stroll out to Crybaby Bridge after dark and stay for 5 minutes. Not a big thing, right? It's something you do when you're young, trying to show that you're not afraid of anything. So I shrugged, took the dare, and headed for the bridge. The walk itself wasn't bad. I knew the road well enough. It's an old dirt track, surrounded by trees that always felt like they were closing in on you the deeper you went. But I'd been down that way plenty of times, usually with friends during the day. Walking it alone at night, though, was a different experience. I wasn't scared, exactly, but there's something about being alone in a place where you've heard too many bad stories that makes you start paying attention to every little sound. By the time I reached the bridge, it felt like I'd been walking for hours, even though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. The bridge itself wasn't much to look at, just an old wooden structure, barely wide enough for a car, with the river running quietly beneath it. I stood there, waiting for the 5 minutes to pass, trying not to let my mind wander too much. I kept telling myself it was just a story, that nothing was going to happen. Then I heard it. At first it was so faint I thought I was imagining things. A soft sound like a distant whimper. I stood still, trying to listen, but it faded as quickly as it had come. I shook my head, thinking maybe the wind had picked up, or it was some animal down by the river. But then it came again, clearer this time, an unmistakable sound of a baby crying. My first thought was that someone was playing a trick on me. Maybe one of my friends had followed me out here, hiding in the trees, trying to mess with me. But when I looked around, there was no sign of anyone. The crying didn't stop. In fact, it started getting louder, more desperate, like the child was closer than before. That's when I felt it. A pull, like I needed to leave. Right then. I turned to head back, but as I did, I froze. Standing in the middle of the road was a figure, small and pale, looking at me. It wasn't moving, just staring. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I didn't know what to do. Run? Yell? But I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring back at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a child, but something was off. The way it stood, the way it didn't seem real. Suddenly, the crying got louder, so loud it felt like it was coming from inside my head. That broke whatever trance I was in, and I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I just kept running, my feet pounding against the dirt road until I reached my car. Even then, as I fumbled with the keys, I could still hear the cries. They followed me all the way home. When I got back, I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my family. I didn't know how to explain what had happened, and to be honest, I wasn't sure I wanted to. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that crying again, echoing in the back of my mind. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it had all been in my head. Maybe it was just nerves or my imagination playing tricks. But the way that figure stood there, motionless on the bridge, didn't feel like something I could just shake off. I kept thinking about it, replaying the scene in my mind, trying to make sense of it. I told myself it had to be some kind of prank, but deep down I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I tried to go about my day like nothing had happened. I went to work, made small talk with coworkers, and tried to keep busy. But every time I found myself alone, that feeling crept back in. It was like a shadow lurking at the edge of my thoughts. I kept hearing that sound, the cry, and every time it played in my head, it sent a chill through me. It felt too real to be ignored, too vivid to dismiss. I knew I had to go back to the bridge, to see it in the daylight, to prove to myself that it was just an old story. So later that afternoon, I drove out there. It was still the same old dirt road, still lined with those same trees. But everything looked different now. I parked the car and walked to the bridge, half expecting to see something waiting for me. But there was nothing. The bridge was empty, the water below calm. I stood there for a while, just listening to the river, trying to convince myself that I'd been imagining things the night before. I felt foolish, standing there in broad daylight, letting a ghost story get to me. Then I noticed something strange. On the wooden railing of the bridge, there were scratch marks, deep grooves, like something had clawed at the wood. They weren't there before, at least not that I'd ever seen. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the rough edges, wondering what could have caused them. Maybe an animal? Or maybe they'd been there all along, and I just never paid attention. Either way, it didn't make sense. It was like the bridge itself was trying to tell me something, but I wasn't sure what. I stepped back, feeling uneasy. It was one thing to hear a strange noise in the dark, but seeing those marks in the daylight made it harder to brush off. I looked around, scanning the trees, the riverbank, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. But again, nothing. Just the wind in the leaves, the water moving slowly beneath the bridge. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that something had followed me home last night. Something I couldn't explain. When I got back to my car, I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my mind racing. I didn't want to believe in ghosts or spirits. I'd always been the type of person who needed proof, something solid to hold on to. But this felt different. It wasn't just a story anymore. Something was wrong with that place, and I'd felt it. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the bridge. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that it was all just in my head. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing in the road, watching me. And the crying. It was still there, faint but constant, like a memory I couldn't escape. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friends. How could I? It sounded crazy, even to me. Over the next few days, things started happening around the house. Small things at first. The lights would flicker. Doors would creak open on their own. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was just faulty wiring or the house settling. But then, I started hearing footsteps at night. They were soft at first, like someone was walking just outside my bedroom door. I'd get up, check the hallway, but there was never anyone there. One night, the footsteps stopped, but the crying came back. It was louder this time, closer. I sat up in bed, straining to hear, hoping it was just the wind, but it wasn't. It was the same sound I'd heard on the bridge, the same desperate wail. And this time, it was coming from inside the house. That night, the crying broke through the walls of my house, jolting me out of sleep like an electric shock. It wasn't just a sound, it seemed like a presence, as if the air around me was saturated with emotion. I sat up in bed, heart beating, and listened closely. The shriek resonated down the hallway, muffled yet desperate. It was difficult to imagine that only a few days before, I had rejected everything as a figment of my imagination. I was fully awake now, and whatever was happening felt terrifyingly genuine. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice shaky. I strained to hear any response, hoping it was just the wind playing tricks. The sound persisted, growing more urgent. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, bare feet touching the cold floor. As I stepped out, I felt a chill run through me, but I pushed it aside. I had to confront this, to find out what was happening. The hallway was dark, lit only by a sliver of moonlight spilling through the window. I crept forward, every step echoing in the stillness. "Come on, it's just the house settling," I whispered to myself. Yet the crying seemed to draw me closer, urging me to follow. I reached the living room, and my heart sank. The crying was louder now, but the room was empty. I could feel my breath quickening, a mix of fear and determination pushing me forward. I moved toward the back door, where I thought the sound originated. The floor creaked beneath me, amplifying the tension. With each step, I wondered what I would find. Would it be a wild animal? A prank from someone in town? The thoughts danced through my mind, but they did little to calm my racing heart. As I reached the door, the crying stopped abruptly, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. "Great, just great," I muttered to myself, feeling foolish. I pushed the door open, the hinges squeaking. The moonlight illuminated the backyard, revealing the familiar outlines of trees and bushes. I stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against my skin, grounding me in the moment. I scanned the area, listening intently. Had I really heard anything at all? Maybe it was just a figment of my imagination, a trick my mind played. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow darted between the trees, just a flicker of motion that sent my heart racing again. "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice trembled as I called out. I took a step forward, drawn by curiosity and fear. The trees stood tall and still, and for a moment I felt utterly alone. Yet that feeling of being watched returned, heavier than before. I made my way toward the shadowy figure, hoping to find some rational explanation. As I approached, I realized it was just a trick of the light, a trick of my anxious mind. I stood still for a moment, breathing deeply to calm my racing thoughts. "It's just me, out here in the dark," I whispered, trying to convince myself. I was about to turn back when I noticed something on the ground, a small, worn teddy bear lying forgotten among the weeds. Picking it up, I felt a shiver of recognition. I recalled seeing a similar bear on the bridge days earlier, the same one I'd thought was just a piece of trash. "What are you doing here?" I wondered aloud. It was a harmless object, yet it felt heavy in my hand, almost as if it carried the weight of a memory or a lost child. The crying surged in my mind again, blending with the darkness around me. I had to know if there was a connection. Just then, the crying returned, but it sounded different this time, less mournful, more pleading. It came from the direction of the bridge. I stared at the darkened path leading back, an invisible thread pulling me forward. "I have to see this through," I said quietly, clutching the bear. There was something deeper at play here, and I couldn't back away now. I took a deep breath, set my jaw, and started walking again, the weight of what lay ahead heavy on my mind. The road to the bridge felt strange in the dark, like if it was alive and moving beneath my feet. Shadows stretched and twisted through the woods, dancing in the moonlight like sinister figures waiting for me to pass by. Each step brought the weight of the teddy bear in my hand, a reminder of the cries that had roused me from my sleep. This has to mean something, I told myself, battling the growing discomfort that accompanied each crunch of leaves underfoot. I could almost hear the whispers of the past encouraging me forward. As I reached the bridge, I noticed the old wooden structure creaking gently in the breeze. It had stood there for years, a local landmark with its own tales of lost things and secrets. I leaned against the railing, trying to catch my breath. Below, the water flowed quietly, reflecting the silver glow of the moon. "What do you want?" I called out, my voice strong despite the dread gnawing at me. The only reply was the soft rush of water, but I felt a change in the air, a tension building around me. Suddenly, the crying returned, sharper now, echoing off the wooden beams. I felt it vibrating in my chest, a primal sound that spoke of anguish. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the world, yet the cries were everywhere. I wanted to turn back, to run home and forget this night, but something deeper pushed me to stay. There's got to be a reason for this, I thought, clenching the bear tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Help me." The voice was clear this time, a small, desperate plea that shattered my resolve. I glanced around, half expecting a child to appear. "Where are you?" I yelled, my heart racing. The bridge stood empty, but the darkness seemed to pulse, alive with the energy of something unseen. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the uncertainty coiling tighter with each passing moment. I took a step forward, looking down the path that led to the water's edge. Maybe someone is in trouble, I reasoned, ignoring the warning bells ringing in my mind. I edged closer, the moonlight guiding my way as I strained to listen. The cries had quieted to soft whimpers, but the urgency was palpable, almost suffocating. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, to take the bear and go home, but the thought of a child in need held me captive. Standing at the water's edge, I felt the cool spray on my face, mingling with the dread that hung in the air. "I can't leave you," I whispered, uncertain of who I was talking to. I reached out, hoping to connect with whatever or whoever was calling. My heart hammered against my chest, a rhythm that matched the rising tension around me. "Show yourself," I urged, my voice echoing against the stillness. Just then, a flicker of movement caught my eye near the water. I squinted, trying to focus. The figure looked like a child, small and frail, standing at the water's edge. "What are you doing?" I shouted, moving closer. "Get away from there." Panic surged within me as I imagined the worst. I felt the weight of the bear in my grip, a silent testimony to the lost innocence of childhood. "Help me find my way home," the voice cried again, sounding so close, yet so far away. I could see the figure more clearly now, a girl with tangled hair and dirt-smudged cheeks. "Please, I can't stay here." Her eyes shone with fear, and I felt an overwhelming need to help her. But as I reached out, she stepped back, vanishing into the shadows, leaving me with only her echoing plea. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Was that real? I asked myself, heart pounding. The bridge creaked ominously, as if aware of my confusion. I scanned the area, searching for any sign of her. "You're just tired," I murmured, fighting the urge to run. Yet, as I turned to leave, I caught sight of something shimmering in the moonlight near the water. A small bracelet, catching the glow as if it were alive. Bending down to pick it up, I felt a cold shiver run through me. The bracelet was delicate, adorned with tiny charms, one of which looked familiar. I stared at it, a sense of déjà vu washing over me. "This belongs to her," I realized, a chill creeping along my spine. The cries echoed once more, and this time they were laced with urgency and despair. I had to know more, to find out who the girl was and what had happened to her. The night was far from over. I stared at the bracelet, its delicate charms glinting under the moonlight. Something about it felt familiar, almost too familiar. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the cold metal against my skin. "What are you trying to tell me?" I murmured, half hoping for an answer. The cries faded to a distant murmur, but a sense of urgency remained, like a shadow lurking just out of reach. I slipped the bracelet into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the worn fabric of my jeans. "I can't leave you like this," I whispered to the night. My mind raced with thoughts of the girl, her plea haunting me. She was real, wasn't she? The thought of her alone in the darkness pulled at my heart. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and started back toward the path leading away from the bridge. As I walked, the trees loomed around me, branches bending and creaking like old men sharing secrets. I could almost imagine them whispering about the girl, urging me to uncover her story. "What happened to you?" I asked the night, my voice barely above a whisper. The soft rustle of leaves felt like a response, but I couldn't decipher the message. I was losing my grip on reality, chasing shadows and echoes that twisted my mind. I reached the edge of the water, where the moon cast a shimmering path across the surface. It was beautiful, yet unsettling. "Do you know her?" I asked the water, half expecting it to reply. The surface rippled, distorting my reflection and making me feel even more disconnected from reality. I could see the fear in my eyes, and I wondered if I was in over my head. Maybe I should just go home, I thought, but my feet seemed rooted to the ground. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted movement on the shore. I turned quickly, heart racing, but there was nothing there, just a flash of white disappearing into the underbrush. "Was that you?" I shouted, adrenaline pumping through my veins. Silence settled around me, thick and suffocating, as if the world held its breath. My skin prickled with anticipation. I felt I was being watched. "Stop playing games," I yelled, anger replacing my fear. "If you need help, show yourself." But the only response was the distant lapping of water against the rocks. I could feel the tension building, every nerve in my body tingling with unease. I was alone, and yet I was not. A memory flickered in my mind, a story I had heard long ago about a girl who had drowned here, her spirit trapped between worlds. Suddenly, the air changed. A chill blew through the trees, and I heard a faint voice calling my name. "Help me, please." It was her voice, sweet and eager. My pulse rate increased as I followed the sound. I pushed into the bushes, desperately searching for her. "Where are you?" I called out, despair creeping into my tone. "I'm here to help." The sound led me deeper into the thicket, where the trees grew denser and the shadows darker. The cries became frantic, pulling at my heartstrings. I was drawn to the sound, like a moth to a flame, feeling both terrified and determined. "Just hold on," I shouted, fighting the urge to turn back. "I'm coming." My legs ached, but I pressed on, driven by a force greater than my fear. Then I stumbled into a clearing, and the sight before me froze my breath. There she was, the girl, standing at the edge of the water, her figure illuminated by the moonlight. "I found you," I shouted, relief washing over me. But as I stepped closer, the expression on her face changed. The fear in her eyes morphed into something darker, more sinister. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice low and haunting. In that moment, everything clicked. The cries, the bracelet, the sense of being drawn into a trap. I had been lured here. "What do you mean?" I stammered, stepping back, confusion flooding my mind. But she simply smiled, a twisted grin that sent shivers down my spine. "You'll never leave," she said, and with that, the world around me began to fade, plunging me into darkness. The last thing I felt was the weight of the bracelet pressing against my chest, a reminder of the girl who had pulled me into her nightmare. Legends pervade the small community of Seven Devils, North Carolina, like the fog that comes in from the mountains. I grew up hearing legends whispered in poorly lit rooms of a dark presence lurking in the woods, waiting for the next lost soul. The old-timers said that once a year this entity would appear, hungry and unrelenting, retrieving anybody who ventured to go too far. I listened half-heartedly, rolling my eyes at the superstitions that appeared to plague my neighbors. To me, these were nothing more than cautionary tales designed to deter children from venturing into the forest. One evening, sitting in the local diner, I overheard a couple of old men recounting the latest sighting of the shadowy figure. Their voices trembled, faces pale as they relived the panic of their encounters. I smirked, nudging my coffee cup across the table. "It's just a story," I said, trying to brush off the unease creeping into my gut. They stared at me, a mix of pity and concern in their eyes, as if I were blind to a truth they'd seen firsthand. But how could I believe in something so absurd? The more I heard, the more determined I became to put an end to the ridiculousness. I thought about it day and night. What if I drove to the end of the road one night? I could prove once and for all that these stories were nothing but folklore. I envisioned myself standing on that lonely stretch of pavement, taking a selfie with the entity behind me. Maybe I'd even share the photos online, a triumphant moment to mock the legends of Seven Devils. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the idea. The pull of the unknown felt stronger than any fear I had. I told myself I wasn't afraid of some old wives' tale. I'd gather my gear, fill up my car, and head out under the stars. My heart raced with anticipation, a blend of excitement and arrogance fueling my resolve. I could hear the laughter of my friends echoing in my mind as I prepared for my little adventure. On that fateful night, I drove down the winding road, the trees closing in like spectators. The moon hung low, casting an eerie glow on the asphalt. I turned off my headlights and slowed down, trying to soak in the stillness. It felt too quiet, almost as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I chuckled nervously, shaking my head at my own thoughts. "Get a grip, Cody," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. I reached the end of the road, the air thick with anticipation. It looked just like any other stretch of pavement. Nothing special. Yet a knot formed in my stomach. I stepped out of the car, the cold biting through my jacket. I thought about how absurd it was to be scared. Just a few trees and shadows, right? Still, I hesitated, scanning the dark edges of the forest, feeling as though I was being watched. As I leaned against my car, the engine sputtered, then died. The sudden silence enveloped me like a heavy blanket. I tried restarting it, but nothing happened. Panic surged. Why had I come here? The cool wind picked up, swirling around me, carrying a distant sound, something like a voice calling my name. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. "It's just the wind," I told myself, but my heart raced. Then I noticed it, a dark shape flitting between the trees, barely visible. I squinted, focusing on the outline. My breath quickened as the shadow grew more distinct. It was long, twisting, as if it were stretching toward me. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Suddenly, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly behind me. I took a step back toward the car, but my legs felt heavy, almost glued to the spot. Desperation kicked in, and I turned to run. But the road transformed into an endless path, the lights of my car dimming behind me. Every step felt like a battle against an invisible force. I could hear the whispering again, clearer this time, tugging at my sanity. As I stumbled forward, the shadow grew closer, wrapping around me like a predator stalking its prey. I was losing my grip on reality, and I had no idea how deep this nightmare was about to sink. I sprinted down that endless road, every heartbeat pounding in my ears. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos swirling around me. Why did I come here? Why did I think I could outsmart a legend? The laughter of my friends echoed in my head, and I felt a wave of anger and fear. I cursed myself for being reckless, for challenging something I had no understanding of. As I glanced back, the shadow was still there, closing in, its form shifting in ways that defied logic. I could see the outline of my car in the distance, a tiny beacon of safety, but it felt so far away, as if the road had stretched into infinity. I could barely think straight. Panic clouded my judgment. Just a few more steps, I told myself. I could reach it. The chill in the air bit at my skin, reminding me that this wasn't a nightmare. This was real, and whatever was pursuing me had no intention of letting me escape. My breath came in quick gasps as I stumbled. I felt the gravel beneath my shoes, sharp and unyielding. I pushed myself to run faster, but my legs felt heavy, almost like they were being pulled down by an unseen force. "Cody, get it together," I muttered to myself, trying to drown out the fear. I could hear the whispers again, clearer now, as if they were just behind me. They didn't sound like one voice, but a chorus, echoing through the trees, urging me to stop. I forced myself to keep moving, the glow of my car getting brighter as I neared it. But just as I reached out to grab the door handle, a cold wind swept through, slamming the door shut. Confusion washed over me. I tried to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. The engine lay silent, a mocking reminder of my isolation. The voice calling my name grew louder, more insistent. Cody. It felt like it was weaving into my very thoughts, wrapping around my mind. Desperation clawed at my throat. I turned to look back into the woods, searching for the source of that voice. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice breaking, sounding small against the vastness of the night. Nothing answered, just the rustle of leaves. But I knew I wasn't alone. The presence loomed nearby, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was as if the forest itself had turned against me. Every instinct screamed at me to flee. I decided to try another escape, the side window. I dashed around the car, my heart racing. I had to get inside and figure out what to do next. But just as I reached the window, a flash of movement caught my eye, a dark figure darting between the trees. I froze, breathless. It was there, standing just out of reach, its shape blurring in the shadows. "Show yourself," I yelled, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. I felt small, powerless against whatever force was manipulating my fate. I grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it into the woods, hoping to scare it away. The sound echoed back, mocking me, making it clear that the entity had no fear. I could almost feel its presence circling around me, as if it thrived on my fear. A part of me wondered if I was losing my mind. Could this all be in my head? I thought about all those stories the locals told, how they described the entity that haunted these woods. It thrived on disbelief, preying on those who dared to challenge its power. Had I unknowingly stepped into its territory, challenging something far older than me? Just when I thought the fear would crush me, I heard a loud thud against my car. I jumped back, heart racing. A hand slammed against the window, a long skeletal hand, fingers curling against the glass. I stared in shock, feeling the warmth of my blood rushing to my face. I could see it now, an unholy visage staring back at me, eyes hollow yet piercing. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was stare into the abyss that looked back at me. Suddenly, a surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I tore my gaze away from the window, running back to the road, but the darkness closed in faster than I could comprehend. Each step felt like a battle against an unseen force pulling me back. I didn't know where I was going. I just had to get away. The shadows twisted and contorted around me, threatening to consume my very being. The last shred of reason whispered a warning in my ear. I had to find a way to escape before the night claimed me forever. The night seemed alive around me, filled with sounds that heightened my senses. Leaves rustled underfoot, twigs snapped like gunshots in the dark. I stumbled forward, adrenaline coursing through my veins, pushing me to keep moving despite the overwhelming urge to look back. The chill of the wind felt like fingers brushing my neck, coaxing me to turn, to confront whatever lurked in the shadows. But I forced myself to press on, knowing that the moment I hesitated, I would lose my chance to escape. As I darted between trees, the moonlight flickered through the branches, casting eerie shadows that danced along the ground. The path seemed endless, stretching far beyond my sight. My mind raced, trying to recall every story I had heard about this cursed place. Stories of people vanishing without a trace, swallowed whole by the forest. It felt surreal, like I was living in one of those urban legends, the kind people share around campfires to scare each other. But this wasn't just a story. It was my reality, and I was terrified. "Just keep going," I muttered under my breath, attempting to convince myself that I could outrun the darkness. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, an insistent reminder that I was alive, yet the fear threatened to consume me. I wished I had listened to my instincts, the quiet voice warning me to stay away. But I had been too curious, too eager to prove that I wasn't afraid of the tales that haunted this area. Suddenly, a noise stopped me cold. A branch snapped behind me, and my heart leaped into my throat. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see something monstrous. But there was nothing, just the flickering shadows, seemingly alive, as if they were mocking my fear. I shook my head, trying to banish the thought that something might be following me. "It's all in your head," I whispered, the words echoing in the stillness. As I continued, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, like the air had thickened. Every instinct screamed for me to turn back, but I pressed on. The landscape morphed into something unfamiliar, the trees twisting and turning like grotesque figures reaching out to ensnare me. I stumbled again, catching myself just before falling. "Stay focused, Cody," I whispered, trying to anchor myself to the moment. "You have to get out of here." The path started to narrow, overgrown with thorny bushes that snagged at my clothes. I could feel the sharp edges tearing at my skin, but the pain barely registered compared to the terror gnawing at my insides. I had to escape. I couldn't let whatever this was catch me. With every step, I imagined the safety of my home, the warmth of my bed, and the mundane comfort of my life. Then a low growl pierced the night, deep and primal. It sent chills down my spine, igniting a primal fear I couldn't ignore. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice trembling. I cursed myself for sounding weak, but I needed to know if I was truly alone. No answer came, only the continued rustling of leaves and that horrible growl, which now felt closer, almost breathing down my neck. Just as I turned to run again, something darted out of the shadows, a flash of movement so quick I could barely register it. My heart raced, my instincts telling me to fight or flee. I chose to flee. I bolted forward, ignoring the branches clawing at my skin, and I felt something brush past me. It was a rush of cold air, like a warning whispering through the trees. I was not alone. My thoughts spiraled into chaos. I'm losing it, I thought, fear turning my legs to lead, but I couldn't let panic take control. I remembered my training from the survival camp, how to stay calm in a crisis. I took a deep breath, focused on the sounds around me, and tried to listen for any sign of where I could go. The shadows twisted, and I felt that unseen presence lurking, waiting for the moment I would falter. And then I saw it. In the distance, a flicker of light. It cut through the darkness, a fragile beacon that promised safety. I pushed myself harder, every muscle straining as I sprinted toward it. Hope surged within me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still chasing me, just out of sight. The light grew brighter, and I could almost feel its warmth against my skin. But would it lead me to safety? Or was it a trap? The night held secrets I wasn't yet ready to uncover. The light flickered ahead, steady yet distant, almost like a star peeking through the clouds. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself forward, each step fueled by hope and desperation. As I approached, I could see it was a small cabin, its windows glowing with a warm amber light. The sight was both a comfort and a curse, reminding me of family gatherings, laughter, and safety, memories I now desperately clung to. Would this be my refuge, or was I walking into a trap set by the darkness that stalked me? I reached the door, hesitating for a moment. The wood was rough under my fingertips, weathered by years of exposure. I knocked lightly, the sound swallowed by the thickening night. No answer came. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. The echoes of my words faded into the stillness, leaving an unsettling quiet. I took a breath, gathering my courage. The light inside pulsed like a heartbeat, urging me to enter. "Just check if someone is home," I convinced myself, pushing the door open. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and old books. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows that danced along the walls. I scanned the room, noticing rustic furniture, a table piled high with worn novels, and photos lining the mantel, families smiling, frozen in time. But something felt off. There was an emptiness that lingered in the air, as if the place had been waiting for me. I stepped further inside, heart racing, the door creaking shut behind me. The warmth felt deceptive now. "Is anyone here?" I called out again, the words feeling inadequate. Silence answered. I moved cautiously, the floorboards groaning under my weight. My mind raced with thoughts. What if I wasn't alone? What if someone or something was hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to pounce? I pushed the idea away, but the tension in my shoulders refused to loosen. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but curiosity held me captive. The fireplace glowed warmly, inviting yet intimidating. I edged closer, drawn to the flickering light. Just then, I noticed a book lying open on the table. The pages turned slightly, as if someone had just read it and left it behind. I picked it up, fingers brushing against the worn edges. The title was faded, but the story felt familiar, like the legends I had heard. A tale of wanderers lost in the woods, seeking solace in a cabin, only to find despair. My stomach twisted. Was this a warning or a coincidence? I glanced around, the shadows feeling heavier now. The light from the fire cast long shapes that reached toward me, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure moving behind the curtain. "Hello?" I called again, voice barely above a whisper. I felt foolish, talking to an empty room, yet that nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't subside. The fear crept back in, tinged with doubt. What am I doing here? I thought, trying to shake off the anxiety. Suddenly, a sound broke through the stillness, a soft thud from the back of the cabin. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone. I strained my ears, listening for anything else. A shuffling noise echoed, followed by a faint rustle, like someone moving through the shadows. "Is there someone there?" I shouted, trying to sound brave, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. I took a step back, heart pounding, ready to bolt if I needed to. The sound stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to thicken the air. I gripped the book tightly, the pages crinkling under my tension. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was just an animal, a deer, or a raccoon, but something told me it was more sinister than that. A deep instinct warned me to leave, yet the door was now a barrier to my escape. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Then I heard it again, clearer this time, a whisper, soft but unmistakable. "Help me." The words sent a chill down my spine. Who was calling? Was it a trick of my mind, or was someone truly in danger? The urge to turn and run clashed with a desperate need to know the truth. "Help me," I repeated under my breath, caught between fear and curiosity. Why would someone need help here? As the shadows seemed to gather around me, I felt the weight of the cabin pressing in. The warmth of the fire no longer comforted me. It felt suffocating. I needed to choose, confront whatever lurked in the darkness, or turn back into the woods, where I might find something even worse waiting for me. The cabin held secrets, and whether I wanted to or not, I was about to uncover them. The lingering question remained: would I survive what I found inside? The whisper lingered in my ears, a chilling echo that drew me closer to the source. I stood frozen, heart hammering, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew that voice was real. "Help me." The plea was soft, yet it reverberated through the cabin, pulling me toward the hallway that led deeper inside. With each hesitant step, the floor creaked beneath me, a mournful sound that felt like a warning. I could hardly breathe, my senses heightened, every detail in the room suddenly sharp. The hallway was dimly lit, shadows clinging to the walls, like secrets waiting to be uncovered. My fingers brushed against the rough wood of the paneling, grounding me as I moved forward. "This is just a house," I reminded myself. "Just a place." But the weight of that thought faltered with every passing moment. A chill slithered down my spine, reminding me that houses can hold memories and fears, just like people. I recalled stories of others who had wandered into unknown places only to vanish without a trace. As I turned the corner, I spotted a door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar. The warm glow from the main room didn't reach this far, and darkness loomed within. "Hello," I called again, my voice barely audible. I approached, my pulse quickening. This wasn't just a simple cabin anymore. It felt like a maze, each corner hiding dangers untold. What if this was a mistake? What if I was walking into something I couldn't escape? I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, I found a small bedroom. The air felt thick, and a chill seemed to seep from the walls. A single lamp sat on the nightstand, casting a feeble light that barely penetrated the corners. My eyes darted around, taking in the unsettling details: an unmade bed, clothes strewn on the floor, and a mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. I stepped further inside, and that's when I noticed something out of place. In the corner, hidden beneath a blanket, was a figure, small and frail. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure stirred, revealing a gaunt face framed by tangled hair. Eyes wide and frightened, they stared back at me. "You heard me," they whispered, a mix of relief and fear evident in their tone. "You're not like the others." I frowned, confusion washing over me. "What do you mean, the others?" As they spoke, I felt a sense of dread creeping in. They recounted how they had been trapped here, hiding from someone or something that stalked the woods. "It knows when we come and go. It doesn't like intruders." I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. "Who? What is it?" I pressed, desperate for answers, but they only shook their head, tears welling in their eyes. "I don't know. I only know that it watches. Just then, a noise echoed from outside, a heavy thud against the cabin wall. My heart raced as I exchanged terrified glances with the figure. "It's coming," they gasped. Panic surged within me. "We need to get out of here." I grabbed their hand, pulling them to their feet, but as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. My heart sank. This was no ordinary cabin. The room felt alive, the walls vibrating with a sinister energy. "What do we do?" I asked, fear lacing my voice. The figure glanced around, desperation etched on their face. "We have to hide. It can't find us here." With no time to waste, we crouched behind the bed, hearts pounding in sync. I could feel the floor shaking, and the air grew thick with anticipation. I thought about how quickly everything had spiraled into chaos, from a simple adventure to this suffocating nightmare. Outside, a growl reverberated through the walls, deep and guttural. I clutched the figure's hand tightly, unsure if they could feel the same terror that coursed through me. "Stay quiet," I whispered, trying to steady my breathing. Every instinct urged me to run, but I knew that would only lead us into its grasp. We waited, breath held, hearts racing, listening to the sounds creeping closer. The shadows outside seemed to dance, taunting us. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the door burst open, revealing a figure cloaked in darkness. My breath hitched in my throat. The figure wasn't human, it was something else entirely, an entity born of nightmares. "You shouldn't have come here," it hissed, voice slithering through the air like smoke. The weight of its presence filled the room, squeezing the air from my lungs. I realized then that this was not just a story about survival, it was a reckoning. With one last look at the figure beside me, I understood the truth. We weren't merely trapped in a cabin, we were trapped in a tale woven from fear and despair. As I prepared to confront whatever horror lay ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would linger far beyond the confines of this cabin. Whatever awaited us would change everything. And just as that realization settled in, a terrifying scream pierced the air, echoing through the woods, a sound I knew would haunt me forever. I'm Nash Tallchief, an ex-military man who grew up hearing legends as twisted as the canyons in my hometown. My roots are deep in this area, particularly in Arizona, where the sun turns the mountains yellow during the day. But after it sets, another type of darkness descends, one laced with legends passed down through my ancestors. Skinwalker Ridge is one of the locations. As a child, I listened to my elders tell stories about shape-shifting beings who duped the unwary into believing they saw familiar faces. I admit that as a veteran, I treated life differently. The Army taught me to rely on facts and evidence rather than old wives' tales. But something about these stories piqued my interest. They described a world where mythology mixed with reality and shadows contained secrets waiting to be discovered. When I returned home from my duty, the attraction of Skinwalker Ridge grew irresistible. I wanted to research, to prove to myself that these legends were nothing more than folklore, stories intended to terrify children into behaving. With a flashlight in one hand and my rifle in the other, I made my way to the ridge. The path was familiar, yet a shiver ran down my spine as I recalled the whispers from my childhood. As I set up camp, I looked around at the towering trees, their gnarled branches stretching toward the night sky. The stars sparkled above me, a dazzling display that felt oddly comforting. I thought of the tales that surrounded this place, brushing them off as mere stories. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The first night passed without incident. I sat by the fire, listening to the crackling flames and letting my thoughts wander. Memories of my brother, who'd passed away years ago, drifted into my mind. I recalled his laughter, his playful teasing, and how we'd camped in these woods together. It felt good to be back, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing uncertainty deep within me. Had I truly come here to debunk myths, or was I seeking closure for the brother I lost? On the second night, the atmosphere shifted. The tranquility that had enveloped me seemed to thicken, turning into an uneasy tension. I lay on my back, staring up at the stars, when I heard it, a whistle, soft yet hauntingly familiar. It pierced the stillness, echoing in my ears. It was the same tune my brother used to whistle when he was happy, a sound that transported me back to childhood. I froze, torn between disbelief and longing. There was no way it could be him. Compelled by a mix of hope and fear, I rose and followed the sound. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground beneath me were pulling me deeper into the woods. I stumbled upon the remnants of an old campsite, and that's when I noticed the footprints. They were human but distorted, as if something had shifted in the earth, something both animal and man. A chill ran down my back, but I pressed on, hoping to find the source of that whistling. Suddenly, through the trees, I saw a figure. It stood still, backlit by the dim glow of my lantern. My heart raced as I called out my brother's name, but the response was cold, hollow. It sounded like him, yet it lacked warmth. The face that turned toward me was a mockery, an imitation that shattered my hope. Panic gripped me as I realized I had stumbled into something far darker than I could comprehend. In that moment, fear took over. I bolted back to my campsite, the shadows shifting around me as I ran. The whispering wind felt like a chorus of voices, urging me to turn back, to confront whatever had lured me out there. I stumbled through the underbrush, desperate to escape. What had I awakened? What truth had I uncovered? I didn't stop until I reached my truck, throwing my gear inside, my hands trembling. I sped away from Skinwalker Ridge, the landscape blurring past me, a series of shadows and whispers. It was a place I had thought I could conquer, yet I left with more questions than answers. The stories I had dismissed now felt all too real. Something about that night clung to me, a reminder that not all legends are just tales. Some are warnings. And now, whenever I hear someone mention Skinwalker Ridge, I can't help but shudder. I can't shake the feeling that I escaped something that night, something that still lingers, waiting for the next curious soul to venture too close. I warn them to stay away, to heed the legends, but deep down, I know some will always be drawn to the unknown, just as I was. I spent the following 3 days wrestling with what I had seen at Skinwalker Ridge. The picture of that deformed person tormented me, but I needed to keep pushing forward. I returned to my routine, attempting to distract myself with work and the usual hum of life in town. But the mountain persisted in my imagination, like a shadow that I couldn't dispel. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whistle, which transported me back to that night and the terrifying impersonation of my brother's voice. I found solace in talking to a close friend, a fellow veteran named Jake. We often met at a local diner where the coffee was strong and the pie was even stronger. "Nash, you look like you've seen a ghost," he joked one afternoon as I stirred my coffee absent-mindedly. I hesitated, but decided to share my experience. "It was no ghost, Jake. I think I came across something real, something dangerous out there." His smile faded, replaced by concern. "What do you mean?" As I recounted my story, I noticed Jake leaning forward, completely engaged. "I remember stories about Skinwalker Ridge from my grandma," he said, his voice lowering. "She warned me to stay away from places like that, said you can't trust what you see out there." I nodded, remembering how we both grew up hearing about creatures that could shift shapes. Those tales seemed like distant memories until now. Now they felt like a warning, a lesson from the past I had ignored. The more I spoke about that night, the more questions surfaced. What if that figure was a skinwalker, a being that could mimic those we've lost? It made sense in a twisted way. My brother had been my anchor, my protector, and losing him had left a hole in my heart. The thought of something taking his shape, manipulating my grief, sent a shudder through me. How far would I go to see him again, to hear his voice one more time? Days turned into weeks, and my anxiety grew. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, even in the safety of my home. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside felt amplified. I avoided the ridge, but that didn't stop my imagination from spiraling. I found myself questioning reality. Was it truly a figment of my mind, or was something else lurking, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself? One night, I found myself driving toward the ridge again. The familiar road felt like a siren's call, beckoning me back to that haunting place. I hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. I was looking for answers, but what if the truth was more than I could bear? My hands gripped the steering wheel as I replayed my brother's laughter in my head, hoping to find comfort. What would he say if he were here? Would he urge me to turn back, or would he join me in seeking the truth? I parked at the edge of the ridge, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, as if whispering secrets to one another. The memories of that night rushed back like an unwelcome tide. I took a deep breath, and with my flashlight in hand, I began to walk the path I had avoided for so long. The first steps felt heavy, as if the ground beneath me remembered my fear. As I moved deeper into the woods, the air felt charged with energy. I could hear the distant rustling of leaves and the chirping of crickets, but something felt off. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for me to uncover its hidden truths. I paused, listening intently, and for a moment I thought I heard the faintest echo of that whistle again, twisting through the trees like smoke. I shook my head, dismissing it as a trick of my mind. But then, from the corner of my eye, I caught movement. A figure darted between the trees. I blinked, heart racing. Was it the same apparition from before? The urge to follow it gripped me, a mix of fear and fascination pulling me deeper into the woods. Whatever it was, it had answers I desperately sought, answers I feared to confront. As I pressed on, the tension coiled tighter, each step taking me further from the safety of reason and deeper into the heart of the unknown. As I moved farther into the woods, my heart beat with a mix of terror and determination. The shadows swirled across the trees, flashing in my flashlight's beam. I heard rustling again not far ahead, and immediately held my breath, hoping to catch any sound. Was that the figure I saw, or was the jungle playing a trick on me? The trees were tall, with branches twisting like skeletal fingers. It felt as if they were closing in, guarding the secrets concealed deep within. Why am I doing this? I muttered to myself, half in disbelief. A part of me wanted to turn back, to retreat to the safety of familiarity, but another part was driven by the need for closure. I couldn't shake the thought that the answers I sought were just beyond reach, waiting for me to find them. That inner struggle mirrored my journey through grief, battling the memories that felt both comforting and suffocating. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew thick, and I could sense a presence, something observing me. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder. "Show yourself," I called out, my voice wavering. The silence that followed felt heavy, like a loaded gun waiting to go off. I didn't expect a response, but I needed to assert my courage, to convince myself I wasn't merely a pawn in some twisted game. Then, there it was again, a fleeting glimpse. I caught a shadow darting behind a tree, and instinct kicked in. I took off, adrenaline surging through my veins, urging me to catch whatever it was. As I ran, memories of my brother flooded my mind. I recalled the hikes we took as kids, our laughter echoing in the valleys. He would challenge me to race him, always a few steps ahead, teasing me for my lack of speed. I could almost hear him now, taunting me to keep up. "You've got this, Nash, just a little further." But this wasn't a game. The stakes felt different. I stumbled over roots and rocks, the flashlight beam flickering, casting eerie shadows that twisted and turned in strange shapes. "Focus," I shouted at myself, forcing my thoughts back to the present. The weight of the forest pressed down on me, threatening to drown out reason. I had to keep moving, had to confront whatever awaited me in the dark. As I pushed onward, the path grew narrower, brambles clawing at my clothes, trying to pull me back. Just then, I heard a voice, a whisper carried on the wind. "Help me." My heart froze, paralyzed by the familiarity of the words. It was my brother's voice. Panic coursed through me, twisting my stomach. "No, this isn't real," I whispered, shaking my head. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being lured into a trap. "Show yourself," I yelled, voice echoing against the trees. There was no answer, just an oppressive quiet. I stood there, my mind racing. Was this a figment of my grief, or was something truly manipulating my memories? The air shifted, sending a chill down my spine. I felt the ground tremble slightly beneath my feet. Something was happening, something I couldn't yet understand. A flash of movement caught my eye again, this time lingering longer than before. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, curiosity overcoming fear. I needed to see, I needed to know. As I reached the clearing, my flashlight illuminated an old weathered tree stump, half buried in moss. It felt strangely significant, like a marker. I knelt, brushing away the dirt, revealing carvings etched into the wood, names, dates, memories frozen in time. My hands trembled as I traced the lines. "What does this mean?" I murmured to myself. Was this a tribute, a warning, or something else entirely? In that moment, the whispers returned, swirling around me like leaves in a storm. Help me, find me. The urge to flee surged within me, but I stayed rooted, captivated by the history etched before my eyes. A low rustle from behind made me jump. I turned, eyes wide, expecting to face whatever had been stalking me. Instead, there was nothing, just the darkness swallowing the light. Yet I felt it again, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but the allure of the mystery anchored me in place. Whatever lay ahead, I had to confront it, if only to silence the ghosts of my past. I took a deep breath, heart racing, and stepped forward, ready to uncover whatever truth awaited me in the shadows. With each step deeper into the woods, the air felt electric, as if something unseen was stirring. The old tree stump seemed to hold secrets, stories trapped in the weathered wood. I brushed my fingers over the carvings, tracing names that felt familiar yet distant. They whispered of lives once lived, choices made, and perhaps regrets lingering long after. "Who were you?" I asked, as if expecting the tree to reply. The moment hung heavy with the weight of countless memories. Suddenly, a branch snapped nearby, jarring me from my thoughts. "Is someone there?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. I scanned the underbrush, half expecting to see a shadow flit past. Instead, there was nothing but the fluttering leaves above. A moment of doubt crept in. What if this was just my mind playing tricks? I recalled stories I'd heard as a child, tales of lost souls wandering the woods, seeking solace or revenge. My own story felt intertwined with theirs, like threads in a fraying tapestry. Determined to push through, I forced myself to focus. "I'm not here to harm anyone," I called, hoping to bridge whatever divide lay between us. "I just want to understand." The tension hung thick in the air, yet there was an odd sense of camaraderie in my vulnerability. It was as if the forest itself listened, waiting for me to take the next step, to delve deeper into the mystery surrounding my brother's disappearance. As I settled into the stillness, I felt something shift. The shadows seemed to deepen, and the faint rustling returned. My instincts kicked in, and I quickly turned my flashlight in that direction. "Show yourself," I commanded, though my heart raced. But nothing emerged. The only sound was my own breath, quick and shallow. I couldn't shake the feeling that the very trees were watching, judging. It felt like a scene from one of those horror films where the protagonist is drawn into the unknown, both terrified and exhilarated. I took a deep breath, allowing myself to recall my brother's laughter, the way it would echo through our childhood home. "You'd always push me to be brave," I whispered, feeling a connection with the past. "Where are you?" My voice trembled slightly, an echo of the hope and desperation mingling inside me. That question hung in the air, unanswered, yet pressing like a weight on my chest. I needed to know, to find a piece of him still lost among the trees. In that moment of vulnerability, the atmosphere changed again. I caught a glimpse of something darting between the trees, a flicker of movement, quick and elusive. My pulse quickened, and I felt an odd mix of fear and curiosity. I took a few steps forward, drawn by the urge to pursue whatever was out there. "Wait!" I called out, urgency tinging my words. It was as if something was leading me, beckoning me to follow, to uncover the truth hidden in the woods. As I moved, I stumbled upon a narrow path, overgrown but visible. It was as if the forest had opened a doorway, inviting me in. I hesitated, my instincts screaming to turn back, yet the desire for answers pulled me onward. What if this leads me to him? I pondered aloud. Every story I had heard about the woods flashed through my mind, tales of lost hikers, of brave souls who ventured too far and never returned. Each narrative felt like a cautionary tale wrapped in a warning. The path twisted and turned, obscured by foliage, but I pressed on. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, just out of reach. "This can't be real," I whispered, half to myself, half to whatever spirit lingered in the darkness. But the pull of the unknown was too strong to resist. I had to see where it led, had to confront whatever lay ahead. Suddenly I heard it again, a low voice, pleading, "Help me." It echoed through the trees, familiar yet unfamiliar, sending a chill down my spine. It was my brother's voice. "This isn't happening," I said, clasping my hands together. I fought the urge to back away. My thoughts raced through the possibilities. Was this a trick? Am I losing control? The thought of turning back flickered like a faint spark, but the desire to find him, to confront my fear, kept me going. As I rounded a bend, the path opened into a small clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows dark, yet somehow inviting. My heart raced as I approached, each step echoing my mixed emotions. What now? I wondered, gazing at the old structure. This place felt charged, like a storm ready to break. I had to know if this was where the answers lay, if this was the key to understanding the mystery that had haunted me. With a deep breath, I stepped toward the door, bracing myself for whatever truth awaited within. The door creaked open, revealing darkness that seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. I took a moment to steady my breath, a mix of anticipation and dread coursing through me. This is it, I told myself, stepping inside. The cabin smelled of damp wood and neglect, a musty odor that clung to the air like a bad memory. Old furniture lay scattered, a table with one leg broken, chairs askew as if they'd been abandoned in a hurry. Each detail felt like a clue, pieces of a puzzle I needed to solve. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing against the peeling walls. The silence that followed was deafening. I was alone, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching. I moved cautiously, shining the beam of light around the room. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by the flashlight's glow, creating a surreal atmosphere. A faded photograph caught my eye, showing a family in front of the cabin. They looked happy, but something in their eyes spoke of hidden sorrow. What happened here? I wondered aloud. A sudden noise behind me made me jump. I spun around, heart racing. Is anyone there? My voice cracked slightly, betraying my fear. Nothing but the creak of the old house in response. I shook my head, forcing myself to breathe. The legends of this cabin came flooding back, stories of people disappearing, swallowed by the very woods I had wandered into. I could almost hear my brother's laughter mingling with the wind, urging me to uncover the truth. I took a deep breath, my resolve strengthening. "I'm here for you," I murmured, though I wasn't sure if I was addressing my brother or whatever might dwell in this place. I ventured deeper into the cabin, each step heavy with purpose. A small kitchen was cluttered with rusted pans and broken dishes, remnants of a life once vibrant. I opened a drawer, finding it empty except for a dust-covered note. I carefully unfolded it, reading the scrawled handwriting. "Beware the shadows, they know your name." Chills ran down my spine. What does that even mean? I muttered, looking around as if expecting an answer to emerge from the walls. The note felt like a warning, a piece of a larger puzzle. I folded it back up, placing it carefully in my pocket. Just then, I heard a noise from the other room, a soft thud. My pulse quickened, a primal instinct kicking in. "I'm not afraid of you," I called, though I wasn't sure if I believed myself. I moved toward the sound, pushing open a door that led to a narrow hallway. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the air felt thick. "This is crazy," I whispered, wondering how I had ended up here, chasing shadows. A door at the end caught my eye, slightly ajar. I felt a pull, as if something was beckoning me to approach. I could hear the faintest whisper, a name, my brother's name. My heart dropped. Was I losing my mind, or was there a deeper connection here? With each step, I felt the weight of the past pressing down on me. "Please," I begged, half expecting an answer. I pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dim, but I could make out old furniture covered in sheets. A large mirror stood against the far wall, its surface cracked but still reflecting. I moved closer, the whispers growing louder, swirling around me. "What do you want?" I demanded, staring into the fractured glass. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of movement behind me, a fleeting shadow, too quick to register. I spun around, but nothing was there. Confusion washed over me. Am I going crazy? I asked myself, frustration boiling beneath the surface. This can't be real. Just as I turned back to the mirror, my breath caught in my throat. In the reflection, I saw my brother standing behind me, smiling as if he were right there. But when I turned, he was gone. Panic surged through me. "What the hell is happening?" I shouted, my voice echoing back at me. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with tension. Then, as if responding to my fear, the mirror flickered, the image shifting. Instead of my brother, I saw a dark figure lurking in the corner of the room, its features obscured. I stumbled back, my heart racing. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The figure leaned closer, and I felt a chill, a presence that chilled my very soul. "I know you," it hissed, voice a blend of familiarity and dread. "You're just like them." Those words sent shockwaves through me, echoing in my mind long after they faded. The room began to spin, and I stumbled back against the wall, struggling to comprehend the unfolding reality. The figure was gone, yet I could feel its essence lingering, heavy in the air. "I need to leave," I thought, but the door seemed to vanish, replaced by shadows that loomed larger. A realization struck me. The cabin wasn't just a place, it was a trap, a lure for lost souls seeking closure, and now I was ensnared in its web. The truth I sought was more horrific than I could ever have imagined. Before I could collect my thoughts, a piercing scream broke the silence, a sound so primal it pierced through me. I dashed back to the main room, but the cabin was deserted, the darkness swallowing everything up. The echoes of the scream persisted, filling me with uncontrollable horror. I realized now, I wasn't only looking for my brother. I was facing the essence of my own worries, stuck in a nightmare with no way out.